What do you remember about World War II?
Well, of course, I remember quite a bit about it, but I've never just studied it and gone into detail about the battles and things as much as some people.
But I mean, in
But
your
I was in
experience.
high school when World War II broke out, and I can remember, the Sunday that I heard that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. Of course, that was a very scary time, and we knew then that the young men would soon be in the Army, that we'd gone to the ones we'd gone to school with and everything. And of course, Fort Chaffee filled up very quickly with soldiers, young men who were being trained. The city was just doubled in population, you might say, or tripled real fast. Everything changed all around. To build the fort, which was before the war, the government had confiscated a lot of land where people had farms and homes and things like that. So many people had to move. We were living at Cavanaugh at that time, and Daddy had he started with 18 acres, and he sold part of it to help pay the expense of redoing the house, I guess. And then he sold some more land to people who came from the camp area, and they moved their house. They had their house sawed in two and moved it in two parts and put it back together, and that was right, our neighbors next to us. And several of the people in Cavanaugh that moved at that time had come from the camp area. They had moved all around the places, but most of them were heartbroken at having to leave their homes where they had been so long. And of course now that land has been converted, a lot of it back into, I don't know, the city or somebody, and there are houses there now. There's building projects, and it's a growing community just at the edge of Fort Smith and Barling, between Fort Smith and Barling. But you might see a few of the old camp buildings as you go through that area now, but I think a few of them are still left. In any case, there were sacrifices. Everybody had to make sacrifices. Before the war was over, Daddy, who was working in Fort Smith at the glass plant at that time, and a best friend of his that worked at the glass plant, decided to go to California to work in a war plant or something like that. They had heard what fabulous wages people were getting out there. So we, two families, packed up, and our family got in the car. Don't ask me what kind it was. I think it was an Oldsmobile. I have no idea what year. Dale would know. He can tell you all about that. All I remember is there were 7 of us with what possessions we could pack in the car and on top of the car, and no air conditioning, and driving to California. And the longest trip we had ever taken was to Hot Springs, I believe, which was not too far away from where we lived. So it was quite an experience, and my sister Velda kept a diary of the trip, and I understand that she has read a lot of that to the family, and it was quite entertaining the way she wrote about our experiences along the way. Well, we made it safely there, but when we got into California, we found out there were so many people there and so many shortages, it was hard to find a motel, a place to even stay. And finally, Mother and Daddy found a motel, and there was a sign on the door, "No children allowed." Well, that kind of left us out because there were 5 of us there. But they kept looking until they found a motel that we could spend the night. Actually, I will have to go back. Maybe we didn't spend the night in the motel. I believe that first night in California, we stayed in someone's backyard. We don't know who they were. Daddy knew, I'm sure he met them. there was a chicken house in the backyard with no chickens in it, and an Irish setter dog that was chained to a clothesline. And we mostly slept in the car. I think Dale and Daddy were supposed to sleep in the chicken house, but probably no one slept much. And it came just a little tremor that night, and we were all ready to go back to Arkansas the next day because our experiences in California at that point had not been too good. Daddy got around and found a place that was for sale. The people wanted to sell pretty badly because they allowed us to move into the 2 back rooms, and they were still in the front rooms living there. This is true. I'm not making this part up, really. And they found a place and moved as quickly as they could, but it took them a few days. So we lived in a house with complete strangers, for just a little while. Well, anyway, we stayed there about a year, and Mother and Daddy, Mother especially, I think, decided she'd had enough of California. She liked Arkansas better. And so we came back. That meant that long trip back, all crowded in the same car, still no air conditioner. The car was getting older and older and older by this time, and it stopped right in the middle of the desert. And it was hot. We knew it was going to be terrible up in the day. We did not know what to do. There was no traffic, nobody going by. I don't think we ever met another car or truck or anything. And Daddy got out and just walked around a little bit, and he saw a sign that there was a filling station real close. It was just out of our sight. And so he came back to the car and told us there was a station where we could stay while he could try to go and get help and see what was wrong with his car. Luckily, somebody took him into the nearest town. They got a car part. Daddy was sort of a mechanic, and he knew what was wrong with it. And he got the part, brought it back, and put it on the car. We left for home again, or no home. We left to go back to Arkansas with no place to stay. So I guess we were pretty daring in our own way. And I didn't know my Mother and Daddy were daring people, but that one experience was the experience of a lifetime, just going to California. Now, I had been going to a school at Cavanaugh. A lot of people today do not realize that where there's a nice grade school, there was once a brick, 2-story brick school that had 5 rooms and 12 grades and 5 teachers in that whole school. And it was just across the street from where my Mother and Daddy lived. And that was where I had my bike ride when I went around the school. Anyway, I had some good teachers in a way. They didn't have a lot to work with. I never got to take typing or home ec. We didn't have basketball games. Of course, most schools didn't have basketball teams or football teams during the war because there were shortages everywhere. But the teachers mostly taught us the fundamentals. And there was a good little library. And that one little school, the teacher had seen to it that we had the classics there. So I read all of Charles Dickens' books, all of the books that I could get a hold of. And my sister Velda used to complain that I was so slow washing the dishes, and she always got to dry the dishes. And she said she had to wait on me because I had a book propped up in the window and I was reading as I was washing dishes. But in any case, when I went to California, I was really worried. I was afraid my training was inadequate. And I found out that with the fundamentals I had, I could adjust, and I did pretty well. Probably could have done better, but I got to take some classes that I had not had before, and I got to take an art class, and I really enjoyed that because they had supplies there that were furnished. I mean, if you wanted to draw or paint or whatever, they had all the supplies. This was a new school at El Monte, California, and that's where I graduated from high school. And I got to be in the senior play. And when I say I got to be in it, it was almost a miracle because they had a rule that you had to have gone to school there in your 11th grade to get to be in the senior play. And I hadn't. So I had to try out from a part, and I got it. And I think I know why. It was my accent. Because I once made a talk in the class, and everybody laughed, and they laughed, and they laughed, and it was not a funny talk. After it was over, I asked the teacher, why did everybody laugh at me? And she said, I think it was your accent. You sounded just like someone on the radio. And I got to thinking, who was she referring to? And I decided it had to be Minnie Pearl. Anyway, I played the part of a school teacher, and her name was Miss Wheeler. And so she was a dramatics teacher. Can you imagine me in that role? Anyway, it was fun. And it was only 2 years later that I was teaching school at Kavanaugh, and I was teaching in Miss Wheeler's room. She had been the teacher the year before. There are funny things that happen. Things just go around and around, you know.
That leads me to my next question. Do you have any funny stories that you remember while you were teaching?
Funny things? While I was teaching at Kavanaugh, I was really just 19 when I started, had 1 year of college. I blame George Combs for that. He was the president of the school board at Kavanaugh, and he had come to me and asked me if I would teach school. And being an unwise teenager, I thought I could do anything. But I decided very quickly teaching was not an easy job. It was very, very difficult. And sometimes there were some hard times in getting through. With a large class, 3 grades, a schedule that is unbelievable. 5 minutes for spelling for 4th graders and 5 minutes. Well, anyway, I survived, and I think all of the students survived. I'm not sure they were all happy, but I think they did survive. The next 2 years I taught were in Fort Smith. And then I married, moved to Greenwood, and I did not teach for a few years, stayed home with the boys, nearly went crazy with just little kids to talk to. And luckily they could talk back. And I decided I wanted to go back into teaching. So I took an extension course by mail and got my certification to teach in English. And I never worked as hard in my life on a class as I did that extension course, that correspondence course. I looked up 1,000 words, their definitions, the origin, and so on. I wish I could remember all of them now. And I diagrammed page after page after page of sentences. And luckily I passed the course, so I was thankful for that. But that led into my transferring from elementary school to high school.